March 13th, 1775, the journey begins. On a brisk Monday morning, I, William Calk, set out from Prince William County, Virginia, on an ambitious journey to Kentucky. By Tuesday night, our group had assembled at Mr. Price's home on the Rapidan River. Among us were Abraham Hanks, Philip Drake, Enoch Smith, and Robert Whitledge. It was here that an unfortunate scuffle broke out between our dogs, leaving Abraham's dog with a broken leg. March 15th to 18th, across the Blue Ridge. We set off early on Wednesday, covering good ground before lodging at Mr. Carr's on the North Fork of the James River. The next day, rain poured for most of the day, turning to heavy snow by evening. The cold gnawed at our bones as we pushed forward, finally reaching Mr. Black's home at the foot of the Blue Ridge. On Friday, we braced ourselves against the fierce mountain winds and crossed the ridge, resting that night at James Loyal's. By Saturday, we had made it to William Anderson's at Crow's Ferry, where we stayed through the weekend, gathering our strength for the trials ahead. March 20th to 22nd, pressing westward. After crossing the ferry on Monday, we pushed toward William Adams' home at the headwaters of the Catawba River. By Tuesday, we had reached Pepper's Ferry on the New River, spending the night at Mr. Pepper's home. On Wednesday, we arrived at Fort Chiswell, where we were finally able to enjoy fresh loaf bread and fine whiskey, perhaps the last real comforts we'd see for some time. March 23 to 25th, the rugged mountains. Departing early on Thursday, we traveled well into the night before reaching Major Campbell's home on the Holston River. The following day, we veered off the wagon road, aiming for Daniel Smith's place. The mountain terrain proved grueling, nearly exhausting us all. That night, we camped beneath a towering mountain along the Laurel Fork of the Holston, roasting a fat turkey for supper, eating it without bread, just as hungry travelers must. On Saturday, we faced yet more brutal mountains, including the formidable Clinch Mountain. We finally arrived at Daniel Smith's, where we rested for several days. A fierce snowstorm hit, blanketing the land, but we made good use of our time, hunting and bringing down 3 deer and a turkey. March 30th, disaster on the trail. Leaving Smith's place, we rode to Elk Garden to gather supplies, seed corn and Irish potatoes. Disaster struck when my horse, startled, bolted and threw off the saddlebags, breaking 3 powder horns. The panic set the other horses into a frenzy. Drake's mare even slammed into a sapling, knocking it down. We managed to recover our gear, though we lost a good portion of our corn. March 31st, stocking up for the wild. We resupplied with 108 pounds of bacon at John Duncan's before moving on to Briley's Mill for meal. That night, we camped by a thick cane brake along the Clinch River and cooked a hearty supper. April 1st, 6th, the perils of the wilderness. Spring had yet to take hold. It was so cold at camp that the ice was half an inch thick in the morning. The terrain worsened, our horses struggling through muddy creek crossings, some falling and soaking their loads. Crossing Powell's Mountain was treacherous, but we found fine grazing land in Powell's Valley. A heavy rain on April 4th slowed us, but by evening we reached Captain Martin's, where we encountered Colonel Henderson's company, also bound for Kentucky. April 6th saw another harsh frost. We waited at camp for Henderson's men, but many of their horses had run off, delaying us further. April 7-9th, fear on the frontier. A heavy snow fell on April 7th, and our group, now numbering 40 men and several enslaved people, camped together. That evening, a letter arrived from Captain Boone at Kentucky, warning of increasing Indian attacks. Some men turned back in fear, but the rest of us pressed on. On April 8th, we crossed Cumberland Gap, meeting many frightened travelers retreating eastward, warning of Indian raids. Still, we held our resolve. That night, we camped by a steep-banked creek, forced to cross it several times. By April 9th, we had reached the Cumberland River. More travelers turned back, warning of danger ahead. April 10 to 14, signs of danger. The next morning, we explored the mountains, finding signs that Indians had recently camped nearby. Some of our men went buffalo hunting across the river but found none. Meanwhile, Captain Hart and his company arrived, hiding some of their lead to lighten their packs. On April 11th, as we crossed the Cumberland River, Abram's mare spooked and plunged into the water with her load. He managed to swim her back, but the cold rain that followed made our trek even more miserable. We met yet another group of men retreating east, warning us of danger, causing Abram and Drake to lose their nerve and turn back. By April 14th, we pressed on through the rough and muddy roads, setting up camp along a creek of the Laurel River. That night, a wolf prowled around our camp. April 15th to 20th, the final stretch. On April 15th, we were joined by more travelers and made our way through the thick brush, crossing the Rockcastle River. Our journey grew ever more treacherous, wading through a creek we had to cross nearly 50 times. But at last, we reached the waters of Kentucky. On April 19th, we arrived at the site of an attack where Indians had fired upon Boone's company, killing 2 men and wounding another. That night, we camped at Otter Creek. April 20th, arrival at Boonesboro. On April 20th, under clear skies, we made our final push to Boonesboro, arriving around noon. The settlers welcomed us with celebratory gunfire, marking our journey's end. April 21st, May 2nd, building a new life. The next day, the settlers began laying out plots of land for the new town. By April 29th, we had built a rough house, covering it with bark, and officially moved in. Enoch, Robert Whitledge, and I began our new lives on the frontier. By May 1st, I ventured out and saw my first buffalo. Though I shot one, I was unable to retrieve it. The following day, we cleared land to plant our first corn, a vital step in establishing our new settlement. A new beginning in the West. Despite the hardships, the bitter cold, and the dangers of the wild frontier, our journey had led us to a new home in Kentucky. Through determination and courage, we had carved our place in this untamed land, ready to forge a future in the vast wilderness.